Today we're going to talk about our inner oppressor. This is part of the series on navigating race from the inside out. My name is Deb Blum, and I am the host of the Inside Out Activism Show. Thanks for being here today. So one of the things that I want to talk about, and the reason why I want to talk about this first is because I think that one of the most important things that we all can acknowledge is that we aren't always nice to ourselves. Sometimes we treat ourselves pretty poorly. We may have ways that we talk to ourselves in a way that's really demanding and demeaning and dismissive. And we sometimes are like an oppressor to ourselves. We hold ourselves back. We imprison ourselves in thoughts and shoulds and belief systems. And there are all these ways that we treat ourselves poorly. And then what happens is we treat others with some of that same energy. But let's just bring it back even further. And let's talk about childhood for a little bit. So what happens when we're kids is that the way that our parents treat us and the voice that our parents use with us is often what ends up being the way that we treat ourselves and the voice we use with ourselves. So if our parents were really gentle and loving and kind and had firm boundaries, and you ended up with a secure attachment with them, you will probably find yourself navigating the world with a more open heart and with less of a need to do unconscious, somewhat manipulative things to get your needs met. Because when we have a secure attachment, we feel more secure within ourselves. We feel that we have worth. We feel good about ourselves. We respect ourselves. And so when we respect ourselves, love ourselves, care about ourselves, and feel attached to ourselves and connected to ourselves, we more naturally feel that way with other people. But very few of us are raised with, I shouldn't say very few. I mean, there is a decent percentage of people. There are a decent percentage of people who are raised with secure attachment. But a great percentage of us have had disruptions in that attachment. So we have had attachment wounding, where we didn't get our needs met by our parents. And it's not that you don't get your needs met once or twice or even 50 times by your parent. It's usually when in some way you're not getting a need met pretty consistently. And now there can be one-off times. There can either be traumatic experiences, or there can be one experience that seemed really insignificant, but it really had a big impact on you. That can happen as well. But these are times when in some way as a child, we didn't get our need met. We didn't get our, we got hurt. We actually got hurt by somebody. So we actually had traumatic experiences where somebody treated us really poorly or hurt us physically, emotionally, psychologically, mentally. And this happens to many, many, many people. When we look at the number of cases of people who experience, especially women who experience sexual abuse and incest and other types of violations. So we understand that very few of us walk away from childhood without some sort of wounding. And even those of us who didn't have anything that was significant, like a big T trauma, we often have had many, many little T traumas. And these are the relational traumas, the attachment traumas, the things that happened to us where we didn't get our needs met, things where we were neglected, or we were told that who we are is not okay. And what happens as a child is that we will always prioritize the attachment that we have with our parent over our authenticity. We will always do that because that's an actual survival mechanism. We must do that because our attachment to our caregiver is so critically important for our survival that we know that. So what happens is we sacrifice parts of ourselves. We believe what our parents say about us is true. And so when our parents say things to us that are harsh, we internalize that. When our parents say things about other people that is harsh, we internalize that too. And so what happens is we start to take on these voices in our head. And so if our parents were more, let's just say, maybe tough on us and really maybe belittled us, or even just were really super, super strict with us, if they used a tone with us that made us feel like we were bad kids and that we were getting it wrong and that parts of us were unacceptable and unlovable, we internalize all of that. Okay, so now that happens to most of us. I'm sure it's hard to imagine that you can't relate to at least some of that. So then what happens is then we become adults, and we begin to treat ourselves, or we keep treating ourselves the same way in many ways as our parents treated us. And then, of course, we also become conditioned by society, by the media, and we also have teachers and coaches and other caregivers in our lives who have their own style of the way that they treat us and the way we relate with them. And all of these things keep on accumulating. They accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. And imprinted within us is an idea that other people try to overpower us, and that we either become a person who becomes more submissive or become more of a fighter. And there are ways that we show up in the world, and everyone's trying to get their needs met, and we're not doing it in a transparent, vulnerable way. We're just showing up with our defense mechanisms and our coping strategies. And I know for me, one of my coping strategies has been to know everything, to be the one that has it all together, the one that is smart and capable and quick thinking, and that I have protected myself in many ways with my ability to communicate, with my choice of words, I have like a veneer of, I think one of my coping strategies was to have a smile and to be happy and to be positive. And some of that is just actually who I am by nature, but I also hid behind that. And there are many, many ways that I did it, but also I had an internal voice of a huge amount of self-doubt, questioning myself. I had a lot of fear. I still carry fear. I mean, even speaking about this subject is really, really hard for me because I carry a lot of fear around this idea of coming out and speaking about something that I don't feel like I'm really an expert in. But I'm also afraid of being judged. I have a lot of fear of being criticized, and I have a trauma from my high school years where I was bullied pretty severely. And in that time, I really developed a definite fear that if I do something wrong, if I get it wrong, that I will be not only hated by the person that I wronged, if you will, but then I will be hated by, they will bring together a whole group of people and they will all hate me, and I will become ostracized and then ultimately killed. Now, I've done a ton of work on that, and I do definitely feel like that doesn't show up as present in my life as it used to, but it's still something that exists. It's just part of who I am. It's part of my makeup at this point. But what happens is we have these inner voices, and we have these ways that we sort of keep ourselves down. And what happened to me was I found that over years I had rejected so many pieces and parts of me because I wanted to be this good person, and I had this cherished view of who I was, and I wasn't willing to look at all the parts of me that were a little less desirable, if you will. And it was only in the time when I began to love all parts of me, love every single part of me, and recognize that every part of me is worthy and lovable, even the parts of me that are not the most virtuous parts, the ugly bits, the things that I do that I'm not as proud of. Now, this isn't at all about arrogance or narcissism. In fact, it's the exact opposite, because I was listening to a video that I will post below. I also posted in the previous video, but about narcissism and this idea that there is this narcissistic way of being, and it can show up more in white people because of the way that we have been conditioned. We've been conditioned to sort of believe that we are, even if we're not thinking about it, even if we don't actually think this about us individually, you might have a lot of self-loathing and self-worth issues, and you don't feel that you're really that great. There is a way that whiteness gets presented to us culturally, societally, as that it's somehow superior. And when that happens, there is a way that we kind of walk around without as much awareness of how we impact other people. And that's part of what narcissism can be. Now, I just want to make sure, if you are a little bit activated by the word narcissism, I just want you to know that I see narcissism as a very big spectrum. We probably all have some narcissism, and some people have extreme narcissism. There are some that are probably clinically diagnosed with have a narcissistic personality disorder. But for the most part, all of us have narcissism, and narcissism can be actually a very healthy thing. Having a strong sense of self and a strong ego can be actually a really helpful thing. It's the reason why you get up in the morning. It's the reason why you can go have a job and you can do a lot of great things. It's how you set boundaries. It's your ability to be able to navigate situations with a very clear mind, and it is a really important part. But if we have all of that, but we don't have empathy and compassion, then we are kind of lacking. Now, some people think that they have a lot of empathy and compassion. I would encourage you to explore that there's sometimes we do a lot of nice, good, generous things for other people, but it still comes from trying to get our needs met. So ultimately, kind of is a little bit narcissistic. So we might be like generous with somebody and kind, but it's because we want them to like us. So it's not coming really from the most genuine place. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to look at this from a little bit of a different perspective. It's not so much about, at this point, at some point it's going to be different, but at this point right now, it's not so much about how generous and compassionate and empathetic you are to other people. It is actually about how generous, empathetic, and kind and compassionate you are. I wanted to make sure I got all the words in there, to yourself. And that's what we're going to start with, because the way that we treat ourselves is the way that so it shows up in many ways. In many ways, the way we treat ourselves will be the way other people treat us. Not always, but it will often be that way. The way we think of ourselves will be the way that other people perceive us. But it's also often the way we treat ourselves is the way that we treat other people, and the way that we look at the world, and the lens we look at the world through. So the more that we are tough on ourselves, the more likely we are to be tough on other people. The more that we are judgmental of ourselves, the more likely we are to be judgmental of other people. Now, some people would say that they're not, that's not true, that doesn't show up that way, but they're kind of one and the same. So if you only do one, like I tended for a very long time to be very critical of people outside, but I wasn't as self-critical, but they're still kind of the same thing. And it was just my way. I projected out, some people project in. So, but at the end of the day, it was still me that I was hurting. It was still me that was hurting inside. So if you find yourself criticizing and judging other people, then use that as likely things that you're criticizing and judging about yourself and just not conscious about yet. If you're critical and judging yourself, then use that as the information that says, this is what you're doing to yourself. So ultimately, anything that you're doing that is quote unquote negative or harmful or has the potential to hurt either yourself or others, that's the information we want to be looking at right now. Because what we're trying to do is look at the places where we reject parts of ourselves, or that we are in judgment or critical of parts of ourselves. Okay? So one of the things that happens is if we disown a part of ourselves, so if we sort of cut off to a part of ourselves, then we will more likely project that out into the world. If we see it about ourselves and we hate it about ourselves, then we'll often be saying it to ourselves. At the end of the day, what we want to do is begin to see the ways that we treat ourselves poorly where we are kind of hating on ourselves. And we want to begin to develop a new relationship with ourselves. Now, this is not going to all happen in here because this is just a couple of videos that are on YouTube. But you can watch other videos that I have that are by other amazing coaches and leaders in this space who talk about self-love and who talk about healing from our traumas, and I will continue to bring more and more in. So my encouragement for you is to look at all the videos that are on this channel, because they're not maybe specifically about race, but they are about this inner healing journey. And I'm happy to refer you to other people who will be able to help you with this. But the inner healing journey is really to stop being the tyrant, to stop being the dictator over ourselves and telling us what that this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. We have many, many parts of ourselves, and some of them are desirable, lovable parts, and some of our parts we aren't as proud of, but that doesn't make them not part of us. And so it's like anything, you might, let me put it to you this way. There are parts of us that are inside of us that are that we might not like. Let's just say, for example, that there is a part of us that can be very angry and we can lash out at people. So the more that we resist the reality that we have that part of ourselves, the more it persists, the more it shows up in our lives in unconscious ways. The more that we bring awareness to that we have the potential to cause harm to other people, the more we will then be able to understand why we do that, why we do what we do, where that came from, what's the wounding behind it, what are the reasons why we feel the impulse to do that, what are we trying to do, what are we trying to accomplish, what need are we trying to get met, etc., etc. All of those pieces, all of those things we can begin to explore. Well, when we better understand ourselves and we better understand why we do what we do, we can then be better set up to provide ourselves with the needs that we want to get met, so we can meet our own needs. We can ask other people to support us in getting those needs met. We can make changes in our lives, but also we can come to love the part of us that we previously judged, because we can say, hey, I get why you've been doing this for me. To that part. You can say, I get it. I get why we lash out at people. I get why we do that, because that's been self-protective. That's helped us to stay safe. But then we get to invite in new tools and new ways of being. And we get to say, hey, what if I showed up more vulnerably and I was just honest and said, hey, this is hurting me. And maybe that's a new way we show up in the world. Or, I'm just giving you some examples, but I'm just trying to help to paint a picture that it's not about saying it's okay to lash out at people and hurt people, but it's acknowledging that that is something that we may do, and that every human being probably on the face of the earth for all times has done it sometimes, and to acknowledge and to love the part of us that has the impulse to do that, and the part of us that got wounded, that had us feeling that that was a good way to protect ourselves. And another layer of that is that we also don't want to shut down parts of ourselves that defend ourselves, because there can be times when we really need that feisty part of ourselves to protect ourselves or our family. And so let's just be realistic that the reason why those things exist is because they have helped human beings survive. So our survival mechanisms, our fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flock, all of those strategies that we have, those mechanisms within us are there to help us to survive. But it's when we allow those things to just run on autopilot when we hurt other people and we hurt ourselves. So the work is in beginning to have a more loving relationship with ourselves, a relationship where we want to understand ourselves better, where we want to know our bits that are a little bit less desirable a little bit better, and we begin to hold the light and the darkness within us, the shadows that we've sort of suppressed, and then also more clearly seeing the things that we love about ourselves, and allowing ourselves and giving ourselves permission to love ourselves, and it sounds narcissistic, and it's actually the exact opposite of narcissism. It's the same reason why when parents are raising children, they think that sometimes that they need to toughen them up, and they need to be strict, and they need to have all these rules, and they need to get their child to conform to be this certain good person. But actually what we're doing in that is we're really shutting down parts of them. We're kind of in some ways like we're creating this idea that there are parts of people that are not acceptable, and impulses that aren't acceptable, instead of honoring and acknowledging all parts, and then helping us to all find our way to live in a way that feels most authentic, most in integrity with what we believe in and what we care about, and most loving, most aligned with love. And so we all want that, but we do it by rejecting parts of ourselves, by rejecting parts of our kids, and by coming down hard on our kids. But the irony of it all is that when we do that, when we come at it from that place, we actually are saying, you're not okay. You, child, are not okay the way you are. You, adult, you're not okay the way you are. And what happens is we become more narcissistic because we're both trying to hide parts of ourselves. So I'm trying to do everything I can to be this virtuous person so that you won't judge me. So I'm trying to hide parts of me, so that cuts me off. And it also is this attempt to stay safe and to stay okay, because I'm constantly trying to check, am I okay? Am I okay? Do you love me? Do you love me? And so we become hyper focused on ourselves and less focused on our impact on other people. So the more that we come into loving ourselves, and that we connect with ourselves, and that we feel like that we're honoring and acknowledging all parts of ourselves, then what happens is we are able to bring that more and more into the world, because we're not quite as obsessed with getting our needs met, because we have come to get our needs met by ourselves. We are not quite as obsessed with whether we're okay, because we have come to love ourselves and feel we're okay. So we're able to see more clearly the people and the impact that we have around us. And this can be massively helpful in our parenting, in our leadership, in our communities, and then it ripples out to the world. So it's why we have to do this work. It's just beautiful, amazing, and really hard, messy, ugly work. It can be really hard, but it's really great, and it's really powerful, and it is the pathway to really creating the life that you want. It's the pathway to having the relationships that you want, and to have the love and connection and compassion and depth of intimacy that so many of us want. And I just want to admit, I'm going to call out that I have made massive strides on this compared to where I was. But I still have a lot of work to do on this. I still don't have the intimacy that I crave and long for in my relationships. And it's a journey. And so we're going to talk more in these videos about how to know what parts to love in yourself, how to find those parts, because it's really an important thing, and so many of us don't really understand how to do that. But what right now I'll leave you with is any place where you're being critical or judgmental in yourself or in other people, any place where you're frustrated and have irritation, these are all great places to start looking and say, what is it about me that I'm trying not to look at? What is it that I'm trying to resist? What parts of me am I saying I don't like, or I wish weren't true? And then begin to just start to examine them, ask questions. Why? Why did I ever start doing this thing? Why do I do it? What happened to me that has me feeling like that's going to be protective for me? What need does that get fulfilled within me by me doing that? And just start to be curious and start to have a lot of compassion for yourself. Start with compassion for yourself. Start with loving yourself, even with all of those things. Think of yourself as a little child. Think of yourself as a little one, and that you are the parent of your little one, and you are helping that little one find a better relationship with all parts of itself or herself instead of rejecting parts of herself. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today. The next time we're going to talk more about parenting, and then I don't know where we're going to go from there, but that's going to be the next one. All right. Thanks so much. And really, really be gentle with yourself, be loving, be gentle with other people. Realize that we are all just trying to figure this whole thing out, this whole life thing out. And, I know I didn't talk a lot about race in this specific thing, but that's not to say that it's not critically important. It is absolutely a critically important piece of it, because if you have an inner oppressor, I assure you that is manifesting as oppression energy into the universe, and it is perpetuating oppression in the world.